we are living in a kind of academic Stranger Things nostalgia, like Stranger Things in the 80s, reviving or recovering these old words like imperialism, colonialism, and sovereignty, because we didn't address those issues properly in the past. So the monsters and the zombies are back.
Why are tech execs talking about digital sovereignty as an argument for corporate control? Shouldn't digital sovereignty mean that we, the people, get control over our digital destinies? The India AI Impact Summit is leaning in hard on concepts that are important, but also often co-opted. So in partnership with AI Now and the Aapti Institute, we've produced a series of interviews with some incredible people who live and breathe substance, analysis, and meaningful action into these concepts. And in this interview, I am talking with Rafael Grohmann about sovereignty. Raphael is an assistant professor of media studies, critical platform studies specifically at the University of Toronto, and his research focuses on things like digital labor, AI in work, AI in the cultural sector. And he has been writing and researching a lot on how sovereignty is being used in these big geopolitical spaces and conversations about technology. So let's get into it. Okay, so we have this upcoming AI summit called the AI Impact Summit. And in these geopolitical moments where all these countries get together and all these companies and all these civil society organizations try in a couple of days in location in some place to advance the conversation about AI, lots of terms get bandied about. Sometimes they're used in this very vacuous way where the people saying them know they're the words they're supposed to be using right now, but aren't necessarily sure about what they mean or what it is they're saying. And it feels like this year, sovereignty is one that just comes up like over and over and over again. So I wonder if you could start us off, given your work on the role of sovereignty and sort of political sovereignty and what it even means when we're talking about technology, given its global in nature. Do you want to talk a little bit about sovereignty as a service, as a concept, and how the use of sovereignty in the last year or so has changed in all these discussions?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for having me. I am a researcher on labor and technology, and I realized probably 5 years ago how sovereignty became a word in the policy spaces. First thing I would like to highlight is an anecdote from my classroom. I had a class on policy and political economy of platforms 2 years ago. And we had a class on social media platforms and regulation of social media platforms. And I asked every student to do a research in a different country about what are the policies of like social media regulation in their places, in their countries or something. And what we realized in classroom is each country in different contexts, we're using same language or same wording to refer to social media regulation, like care, duties of care or something like that. And what was funny, I invited the Brazilian Secretary of Digital Policies to send a question to my students because I'm from Brazil. And he sent a question over WhatsApp, like a voice note during the class. And he was repeating the same languages all these papers were using to refer to different contexts. So what this anecdote taught me was there is a kind of playbook for policymakers around the world. And they are preferring to read and to follow this playbook written by I don't know who, then looking at their respective context before to design policies. So this is one of the reasons sovereignty became one word in these specific places. And if you think about sovereignty, this is not a new word. I was discovering that like Canada in the 70s was talking about tech sovereignty in that time, because the 70s was a time where countries like in Latin America, there was the Marxist theory of dependency, or a lot of theories of dependency, and sovereignty is the opposite or one of the opposites of dependency, being a dependent country in relation to others in the global north in terms of technology means that you are not sovereign in that area. And it's so interesting because nowadays, even in the academic sense, we are living in a kind of academic Stranger Things nostalgia, like Stranger Things in the 80s, reviving or recovering these old words like imperialism, colonialism, and sovereignty because we didn't address those issues properly in the past. So the monsters and the zombies are back because we are seeing imperialism, colonialism, and all these issues in worst phase. So in the beginning, sovereignty, or in these theoretical terms, sovereignty is something good that refers to both like territories, like states, or even in the popular formats, like here in Canada, it's so common to talk about indigenous sovereignty, or in Latin America, talking about popular sovereignty or sovereignty from people, or how people have to take control and autonomy over their lives, over their technologies, and so on and so on. But what's happened was someone in a policy world decided that sovereignty was a word to start conversations. So probably like international labor organizations, United Nations, started to talk about tax sovereignty and digital sovereignty 8 years ago, 7 years ago. One of the foundational papers on digital sovereignty is from 2019. It's from two Canadian colleagues of mine called Stéphane Couture and Sophie Toupin. And at that time, they already said that sovereignty is not only one thing. Even in the political sense, what the indigenous communities and peoples are talking about sovereignty is not the same thing they states or like national states are saying about sovereignty. They have different interests, they have different meanings, and what we mean by digital sovereignty or tax sovereignty can mean different things. So before big tech entered in this debate, this notion of digital sovereignty was already over, the meanings were over struggles. So, and in dispute among different actors, oh, this is my preferred notion of sovereignty. This is your preferred notion of sovereignty because it's so like an umbrella term. Like AI, you can put everything with AI and sounds like something hype or something like that. And if you put sovereign AI, it's better because you have something else to qualify this debate. And the notion of digital sovereignty appeared in a time where, especially digital platforms or platform companies, started to overcome the role of state and the role of civil society. They started to play as states, and especially like from 2016 when Trump won for the first time. So sovereignty as a way to address tech dependency and also to address the way some platforms are trying to circumvent rules in countries like Brazil or even in regions like European Union. But what some platform companies learn is the way they always do with a lot of words, because you can see the way digital labor platforms like Uber or DoorDash or something, they already co-opted the terms of autonomy, saying that the workers have autonomy of over their labor when they are working for apps like Uber or DoorDash. And other companies co-opted terms like partners. You are not a worker, you are my partner, you are my collaborator. So the way companies, especially tech companies within this California ideology or Silicon Valley ideology, they are always trying to co-opt the discourse in order to empty the political meanings or to reappropriate the meanings from their own ways. This is not something really new. But what happened with this notion of sovereignty in a reaction to the proposals, especially in European Union, trying to address regulation and strong regulation for platforms and for AI? And this was a kind of communicative or discursive response from the companies when 2, 3 years ago, Meta, Alphabet, and Amazon launched digital sovereignty programs. And you can say, like, is it a joke? Uh, why Amazon, the leader in infrastructure services and cloud services around the world, is launching a digital sovereignty program and what that means. And they are selling sovereignty as a service. And they are reappropriating the terms like data sovereignty as something individual, as something you can claim, you can buy, and especially directed to governments. If you are government, especially in the global south, and you want to be sovereign, but you don't have the infrastructure or the money to be sovereign in a proper way, we can sell sovereignty for you. And what they means, they install a local cloud in the country saying you are sovereignty because now the cloud and the data centers and something they are in your own territory, but it's owned by us. And so this is a way in both material sense and discursive sense to sell sovereignty as a service. And this is the sovereignty claimed by big tech or big tech sovereignty.
Thank you for that. And I also just think it's so interesting how the definition has evolved. And I think starting in the 70s and conceptualizing it as part of a challenge to dependence on global North infrastructure and the fact that we're kind of back there again. And there's this sort of similar definitional war and maybe tokenization of the word or the concept. Because I agree with you that sovereignty as a service from an American company to a foreign company is laughable. Like that makes no sense at all. And so it is a bit upside down, also to use your Stranger Things reference, which I appreciated. I know you've been working with some movements to sort of propose alternative visions for digital sovereignty that might take the political potency of the concept of sovereignty and actually make it real and have it be a useful pathway to finding something on the other side of this giant monopoly American domination. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of those definitions or where you see promise in sort of reclaiming and sort of reframing sovereignty as a term and a tool?
Yeah, the way social movements are reclaiming digital sovereignty from below is a reminder that regulation is not enough or policies from the states are not enough. I don't like this opposition, like from above, from below, but this is really how ordinary people can push and pressure for policies from their own perspectives and not waiting for the language of the policymakers. This is something. I've been working with worker collectives in the past 7, 6 years, and especially one social movement called homeless worker movement in Brazil. First, I know in English, homeless is not a politically correct word nowadays, but and the correct is unhoused. But this is the way the movement framed themselves in English. And the word in Portuguese is already a provocation. It's called Movimento dos Trabalhadores Sem Teto. And sem teto is not a formal word, it's a kind of provocation. The homeless working movement is one of the strongest and largest urban social movement in Latin America and a kind of twin of the most famous landless worker movement, which is more peasant movement and something. And the homeless worker movement is a movement for struggling for housing and the right of housing in the urban places. And in 2018, when far right won the election in Brazil under the presidency of Jair Bolsonaro, the movement started to think that how the institutional left, especially in Brazil, was losing the battles in the digital environment and how far right were dominating the environment and the battles and the ideologies and the internet and how the institutional left don't understand sometimes the role of technology beyond being a tactical tool. So they decided to create a tech sector inside of this big social movement. It was interesting because until then, I was close and I'm close to a movement called platform cooperativism. So workers who are building, designing cooperatives as an alternative to digital labor platforms like Uber or DoorDash. And what the homeless worker movement did, like we are not a cooperative, but they started to organize tech workers, especially during the pandemic, who were unhappy working with for these large companies like tech companies in Brazil, and they were working from home and they want to do something. And they started to organize tech workers in order to create technology for homeless people and house people in Brazil. And nowadays they created a lot of these services. One of them is called Hire Those Who Struggles. It's a kind of task rabbit governed by a homeless worker movement. And they hire activists from the movement in the construction sector, construction workers and domestic workers. So they go to clean your house as an activist of the homeless worker movement. And they also help to circulate the struggles. And what was interesting was this movement talking about technology in a social movement perspective, who started to theorize about digital sovereignty from their own perspectives. So I moved from Brazil to Canada 3 years ago, and we launched a primer called I think the title is Digital Sovereignty and Homeless Worker Movement in Brazil. And they started to theorize, which for me is a kind of epistemic sovereignty, not only academics producing knowledge. So my role was more a facilitator. And they started to think that a social movement who wants to struggle for house. And nowadays, the homeless worker movement is also part of the Socialist Party, and also the leader almost got the election of mayor in Sao Paulo 2 years ago. They need to talk about the importance of creating alternatives to tech or creating alternative frameworks, worker-led frameworks for technology, community-owned technologies. Like there's a crisis of imagination. So they started from there that people don't imagine what is that. And they started to frame digital sovereignty as a kind of guide. Like the movement, as all our lives under capitalism, is full of contradictions, but they elect digital sovereignty as a guide. And what they mean by digital sovereignty, they call it is a popular digital sovereignty or digital sovereignty from popular power. And in Latin America, popular is not something bad. It's from people and from the communities. There's some powerful thing that in meaning this popular digital sovereignty means how the communities from below can control tech and infrastructure, can design technologies from their own perspectives beyond big tech, and they can control the infrastructure, sometimes with the state, sometimes beyond the state, sometimes despite the state, and sometimes against the state. And so the role of state is important in this notion of sovereignty and how these technologies needs to serve the communities and the territories and not the opposite. And this movement is so inspired by the Brazilian educator Paulo Freire. And Paulo Freire has an interesting and powerful statement from like 60s or 70s, and is that reading the world, that is the universe, precedes reading the word, the language. And they paraphrase Paulo Freire saying that reading the world, the universe, precedes reading the code. So they started to teach computation to people in the suburbs of Brazil, especially in Sao Paulo, teaching people how to code without using a computer and from their own perspective. So it's a movement about education, about circulation of struggles, and about imagination. And the way they are framing popular sovereignty, and we produced a comic book with them. It's called Other Tech Worlds Are Possible. And in this crisis of imagination, if even when we don't have all the finished projects, we have to start with philosophies and with prototypes like Hire Those Who Struggle.
When you think about other worlds that might be possible with the comic book as an example, what do you think needs to happen to change conditions around these big discussions related to AI that might make those better conceptions of sovereignty more real in the future?
In the case of homeless worker movement, they really use the tactic of occupation because they used to occupy houses when they were not used. So in order to give houses to unhoused people. They are using this logic of occupying or hacking in technology as well. So they started to pressure. Now they have seats. They have one seat in the Brazilian data protection policy because they thought we have to occupy these spaces. We have to go to AI Summit and have one representative there. And even my partnership with them started when I was working in Brazil, and having this comic book in Portuguese, Spanish, and English as a way to spread the word. This, for me, this is a powerful example of communication as well, and how we have to create this discursive power if we want to struggle against big tech. And in terms of how to create other AI words as possible, I draw a lot on the work by Tim Gebru and Joana Varone. Joana Varone is a powerful Brazilian activist. She designed with Sasha Constanza Schock a card game called Oracle for Transfeminist Technologies. And together with Teamnit and others, they wrote a piece on AI Commons for G20 in Brazil last year. And for me, this is a powerful example, like the Commons framework. And I think there is two things I can address based on the report in my own research. First is the role of data workers. Even like nowadays, sometimes in my own bubble, looks like we are talking about data workers every day, and even like in my classes or with my peers. But actually, the majority of people until now don't know that the majority of people who train data for AI have like poor working conditions, and they are a lot of them based in the global south, in countries like Kenya, Venezuela, Brazil, India, the Philippines. And there is no policies for data worker and data work in the dominant AI discussions. We tried to push that in Brazil, and I know, like, I have knowledge in the Brazilian context. I can talk about Brazil. The data workers are not addressed neither in the platform labor regulation and policies, nor in the AI policies in the national plan or Brazilian strategy on AI. And these workers have to be acknowledged as workers. And also, we have to create an other arrangement for it. I've been researching with Argentinian Federation of Tech Cooperatives. They have more than 40 cooperatives. And the second volume of this comic book will be with them and will be launched in the next few months. And they have around 40 tech co-ops in Argentina because of the policies on cooperatives there. And what I'm realizing, some cooperatives, when they have to do data work, they hire another cooperative to do that kind of internal work in a more decent way than externalizing to big tech to do this work. And so it's an experiment as well. As you say, sometimes the scale, we don't have it. So we have to address both policies and creating alternatives for data work in a more common based perspective. The second thing is about the coalitional power or intercooperation or organizing. I feel that the groups who are trying to fight against big tech or creating alternatives, they are a little bit isolated, and we need to create more cooperation among grassroots movements around the board. Like tech workers, data workers, social movements, civil society coalitions, in order to address the AI or the technologies we want for the future. This intercooperation part is so important for cooperatives, for instance. Realize how the cooperative response for the digital economies is not each city creating their own app or each city creating their own AI version of something, but sharing infrastructures or sharing projects. This is something, even like in the so-called gig economy, the European delivery workers created an app shared by cooperatives in cities like Barcelona or Bordeaux in France. So they're sharing the same app or sharing these infrastructures and sharing the costs for it. It's a federation called Co-op Cycle. So we have all these examples from Co-op Cycle to the homeless worker movement or the Federation of Tech Co-ops in Argentina. They are what I call prototypes of struggles. They are prototypes because they are experiments, they are laboratories, or sometimes I call them laboratories because they are made of so much labor. Because they're they are not finished projects, which is good and bad. It's good because we have potential to create or scale or to create coalitions or something. And I don't like when academics, especially in journalists, try to frame them as finished projects because they try to evaluate and say they're failing. So yeah, because they are not like startups. This is the reason I call them prototypes of struggles, not only because of class struggles, also because of the political power, but because they're struggling to survive. And we need to create more coalitional power around it. And I think also there is a kind of how we will learn about these alternative experiences or about these prototypes of struggles. Because everybody knows like Netflix, but they don't know that there is an working on a streaming service based in Detroit called Means TV, MEAANS TV, work owned by workers. So the initiatives like this one or homeless worker movement or others, they suffer a lack of visibility in the political spaces. And sometimes, oh, I am a worker based in Finland. I want to start something. I don't have to start from the scratch because we already have other people doing similar things around the world. Other examples in Latin America, there's a network on feminist AI, and they are funding prototypes of feminist AI, and they are trying to see what a feminist AI like look like. Here in Canada, probably Canada is the first country in the world to talk about indigenous AI, and like with a lot of documents and people from the communities talking about, oh, we would like to have an AI from the indigenous perspective with the indigenous values there. So we have to circulate these struggles because it's not, and for me, it's a kind of politics of memory as well. As in the 70s in Latin America, there was a lot of discussions about dependency, but also there was a lot of alternatives to it, starting from this most famous case of cybersyn in Chile, which was a project trying to put together socialism and cybernetics, and this was interrupted by the state funded by the US. In the 70s in Latin America, there was a lot of similar projects like cybersyn in order to create tax sovereignty for the region. But most of these projects were invisibilized or failed because of interruption or because of political pressures from other parts of the world. So this politics of memory means both trying to recover the invisibilized past of our regions related to community tech or alternative tech in order to imagine and co-design other possible digital futures.
When you think about something like the AI summit, when they throw around words like sovereignty, what is your most ungenerous interpretation as to why in these spaces it's attractive to sort of talk about sovereignty in these ways and for companies and countries and the kind of discourse to be focused on sovereignty?
It's the context. We are like in the 90s, we lived in a context of globalization, and we are not living in a context of globalization anymore for a lot of reasons. And sovereignty can be plastic enough to be used by Trump or by China or by European Union or Brazil in different meanings. So they can use the same words with so different meanings and participate in the same conversation because they are not the same thing. When Trump are reclaiming sovereignty, is not the same word than the homeless worker movement. But I don't know why they are, all of them are using the same word. What I know is both in the policy debates, but also in academia, there are some hype language depending on the context. I can say from academia how decolonial became a trend even in so colonial spaces, saying decolonizing curriculum, decolonizing like comic book, and also co-opting them. And it's about power relations and how if you create alternative, let's bring these alternatives to us. I will finish with one example. When I was living and working in Brazil, I organized a public seminar on platform cooperativism and public policies. And the main delivery platform in the country attended the conference as spies. They didn't say to the people they were staff, they were like employees of this big delivery platform in the country. And people discovered they were not like ordinary attendees, they were like spying the event as the delivery platform. And they say to someone, we want to create cooperatives as well. So when you try to create an alternative, the discursive power will try to avoid this alternative. And discourse is one of this issue. There is another hype word, which is governance. And governance is really related to sovereignty. And governance sometimes is framed as something, oh, workers have a seat, government have a seat, and everybody has a voice on this so-called governance. But really, it's class struggles. It's not something equal. It's profoundly unequal and unfair because what you call AI governance is someone having more voice and more participation than others. So it's a kind of fake word to name the real politic.
Yeah. I love that. Well, thank you so much. I think this was just so much food for thought on both grounding what we mean when we say sovereignty, recognizing that there's histories there that we have to account for, recognizing it's a word that is so overused that it has almost lost its meaning, but it shouldn't, because there are people that are using it meaningfully to actually engage in politics that are essential in this moment. And I appreciate you kind of walking us through all of that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thanks again to Rafael for joining me. This episode is a reminder as part of a series we're doing in partnership with AI Now and the Aapti Institute called Reframing Impact, AI Summit 2026. We've got interviews with some incredible guests, and you can find the full series on our YouTube channel, so go check it out.